My name is Taylor. I live in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Treaty 1.
My name is Arslan Gaimi, and I'm from Vancouver, British Columbia.
My name's Grace, and I live in Edmonton, Alberta.
My name is Jason Hawkins, and I'm from Eglinton Lawrence riding in Toronto.
It's a week until the federal election.
I don't know who to vote for.
I'm undecided.
I have questions.
I need answers.
My vote matters.
This is my time.
I vote because I can.
I want to ask how the leaders will help my generation access our Canadian dream.
I want to ask Mr. O'Toole what kind of government he and his party will form if they are to win.
Hello there, and welcome to Face to Face with the federal leaders. I'm Rosemary Barton. I'm here in the National Studio in Toronto. It is, as you probably all well know, the final week now of the federal election campaign. And that means that millions of Canadians only have days left to decide who gets their vote on September 20th, provided you haven't done it in advance polls or mailed it in. The last time we did this, it was great, but things looked a lot different than they do today. We filled the studio with voters who were hoping to get a chance to ask questions to a major national federal party leader. This time, because of everything, because of COVID, our audience has to be a virtual one. But no matter how we're connecting, we did want to make sure that this election is about you. That is our goal here at CBC, that the voters get a voice. So this too, a place for you to ask your questions about some of the promises from the parties, talk about your concerns for the future of this country, and try and get some answers from all of the leaders too, that maybe will help you make a decision when you get to the ballot box. We have invited 4 people to speak to the leaders. They are all undecided and looking for answers ahead of voting day next week. And tonight, starting off our series, Conservative leader Erin O'Toole is joining us. Good to see you. Thank you for making the time.
Great to be here.
I know it's busy. I know it's hard to squeeze in this kind of thing, but we appreciate it. And I think our voters will too. To be transparent so that people know, we did give you first names, we gave you hometowns, and we gave you general topics, but that's it. Otherwise, you're on your own here. Here's our first voter.
Alligator pie, alligator pie. Hi, my name is Jason Hawkins. I'm 36 years old and I live in Toronto's Eglinton Lawrence riding. My wife and I are both high school teachers. However, this year she's not coming back to school as she'll be home with our recently born twins, Gordon and Viola, who are both 4 months old. This election, like previous elections, issues such as climate change and reconciliation will be big issues for me. But for the first time ever, the issue of childcare will also be a huge issue, helping decide who gets my vote.
All right, that's a household that doesn't probably sleep very much. Jason, it's over to you. We're going to start the clock. 5 minutes for you to ask Mr. O'Toole some of your questions.
Hi, Mr. O'Toole. So being new parents is amazing. My wife and I are loving every moment of it. Less lovable, however, is the reality that next September, when her maternity leave is over, we are looking at a daycare bill in Toronto of upwards of $3,200 a month. That's not manageable for our family, and I can't imagine that being manageable for most Canadian families. And it might very well mean that one of us is not able to return to the workforce next year. So, Mr. O'Toole, what I'd like to hear from you is concrete solutions that your party is going to bring forward to deal with the growing cost of childcare, particularly in Canada's big cities.
Well, first off, Jason, congratulations. I have 2 children, but my wife and I were fortunate enough to spread it out. You have it two for one. Look, childcare is on the minds of all families, and we had our first child, Molly, when we lived in Toronto in the Beaches, and it took us months to actually find a spot for her so that Rebecca could return to the workforce. So I get it. What we're offering with our approach is a way to try and help all families directly through the tax system, giving them the flexibility to come up with what works best for them and their circumstances. With the lower income levels, the amount we want to help will represent about 75% of the cost based on a one-child situation, of course. And that's the way we want to do it. And it won't just come at tax time, it will be a benefit throughout the year so that there's that go-to support. And it's immediate. What Mr. Trudeau is pledging is a program that would be implemented in about 5 years from now, and it would not provide spaces for all families in all circumstances. It would also leave out some people that are in situations of shift work and other things and needing a little more flexibility. So what we want to do is build in that flexibility, let you and your wife make the best decision for your circumstance, but I certainly want you to know that we want to give you those tools immediately, so this would be in our first year as a government.
Your plan is much more focused on economics. You seem to know more about economics than I do, but I do know about supply and demand, and your plan doesn't seem to address either lowering the demand or increasing the supply. So how is that going to have any impact on, again, the astronomical price of childcare for people in Toronto?
That's a good question. In fact, the C.D. Howe Institute just confirmed that when a direct support is increased to families, it does increase the number of places. What Mr. Trudeau is saying is 5 or more years from now, their setting up of this structure will create more spaces. But it will not be enough for all families, and it will only work in some circumstances. It will literally leave out anyone on shift or irregular work, for example. It won't build to the unique needs of a family. Even in your situation with twins, there's very unique needs. Some families living with autism or developmental disabilities will need even more specified support. So what we want to try and do is provide as many tools and flexibility for families to make the best decision and to have this flow immediately. For example, with your twins, there may not be any coverage before they hit junior kindergarten under Mr. Trudeau's plan because it spaces 5 or more years from now. So I want you to know, as a parent of young kids myself, this is important. That's why we want to move quickly and help as many people as possible.
You mentioned that it would cover 75% for those of the lowest income. What is your cutoff for family income for those of the lowest income? I want to know if I'm going to fit anywhere in that.
The lower income would likely be those in the lower income bracket. Some people that will be receiving the Canada Workers Benefit, for example, which we're doubling to try and help people at the lower income levels. So we'd have to see exactly your circumstance, but our plan will help all families immediately. And I want you to know we also have an approach on housing, on affordability to try and bring costs down as well, because I know as a GTA MP myself, there's a bit of an affordability crunch right now, and we're trying to tackle that with our platform.
We've got more on that issue of affordability. Jason, I'm going to have a little go, if you don't mind, and then we'll come back and see if you're satisfied with what you heard there. You said a couple of things. First of all, you said that the Liberals' plan doesn't go into effect right away. In fact, the fees go down by 50% right away. In many of the provinces where they've made these deals already, we're looking at creation of spots between 2 to 5 years. So some provinces will have more spaces before others. I think that's fair to say. And eventually it would go down to $10 a day. I get what you're saying, that you want families to have choice. But in order to have choice, you also have to have things to choose. And your plan doesn't directly try to create spaces, which is also sort of the other part of this equation. Is there anything you could do to do that? Are you concerned that you're giving people money, but not actually giving them access?
Well, and this is a bit of an area that's not well understood. It will create more spaces. This is what the C.D. Howe Institute
Just by
studied.
the market demand.
Just by providing more resources for families directly. Is every dollar tied to a space? No, it's tied to allowing the family to make the decision. Right. I'll often use the shift worker as an example. We've talked about our front lines, our nurses, our PSWs, they often will work evening shifts. Sure. So a spot in a school that won't be open, that's not a solution for a lot of families.
But you keep saying that it's a spot in a school. That's not what I understand the Liberal plan to be. The Liberal plan is to create a national childcare program across the country. It could apply to shift workers. It doesn't have to be in schools. So I guess I would go back to my question then around spaces. You say it's going to be sort of the market that will create the how long is that going to take? Surely that's going to take just as long as the Liberals promised to create spaces over 5 years.
No, this is going to give families help now. So in Jason's situation, they have 2 young children right now, babies. They will get support right away when we roll out this program. And we've said we want to transition.
But they won't get spaces. They'll get the money.
They'll get the money.
and then have to go find the spaces if
they're
there is
in one of those provinces where the spaces will be created in 5 years, there's nothing for them until their kid's already in junior kindergarten. So this is probably why the Liberals have promised this 7 or 8 times, Rosie. And even in the 6 years of Mr. Trudeau being Prime Minister, he signed these weeks before calling an election. And in the case of Quebec, it's not even tied to actual spots. So what we want to do is help all families.
They already have their own daycare system. That's why. Jason wants back in, and then I'll have another go. Jason, go ahead.
Again, I'm kind of hoping to know what your definition of the low income bracket is. Where is your cutoff for low income families? Can you put a number to that, Mr. O'Toole? Numbers seem to be your platform's thing.
It would be the folks that are in the lowest income tax bracket, which I don't think in your case as a teacher you would be, Jason. I'm just being honest with you. What we're doing is trying to help folks there that it'd be 75% of the cost. And some people have also said, oh, you're going to wait till tax time. No, we want to design a structure that will allow that payment to be broken up throughout the year so that it can be relied upon by the family. And we want it to get out quickly. This is the key thing.
Forgive my unfamiliarity with tax brackets. Can you please put a number to the top of the lower income tax bracket? How much are those families bringing home every year?
It's very low. It'd be in the $30,000 range, which is why we're also doubling.
So how many families are actually going to benefit? How many families are actually going to see that 75%?
A lot. What we have to recognize is there's a lot of inequalities right now in our society, particularly families living in the cities. And this is why we're also, one of our major planks is doubling the Canada Workers Benefit, which amounts to people in that lower income bracket having a $1 per hour raise. They're squeezed and they need help now. And in those brackets, Jason, to be honest with you, a lot of them are on shift work.
Okay,
So we want them to get help. If they're not going to be helped if only a traditional spot doesn't suit their working hours.
One more question for me, if I can. So you would cancel the deals that are in place already, which, yes, to your point, just happened before the election was called. And you would not allow any of those provinces except Quebec to keep some of the money promised. Is that correct?
What we've said, we've transitioned with the provinces. So the next year, the commitment would be recognized and honored, and we would try and transition. What the big difference
for all provinces, not just Quebec.
For all provinces. Obviously, Quebec for 20 years has had a very distinct program, and that is why the arrangement there was never without related to a certain number of spots. You know, Mr. Trudeau kind of said this is for just recognizing your program type thing. What we want to do is build in a transition. And unlike Mr. Trudeau, who even every week in this campaign is picking fights with premiers, I actually want to collaborate with premiers. So what we've said is our plan will help all of your citizens, but we want to make sure the transition's fair to you.
Welcome back to Face with Erin O'Toole. Let's get to our next questioner.
Hi, my name is Taylor. I'm a 40-year-old transgender woman from Winnipeg, Manitoba. Born and raised, lived here my entire life. I'm a data analyst. I've worked out of the same company for just over 10 years now. Love playing sports, especially softball, as you can tell. Fitness, too, obviously, is important to me. And for fun, you can find me singing karaoke. I always like to sing a song, too. I'm an undecided voter because I want to know more about what is going to be done to end bigotry and hate-based abuse. Let's be leaders and role models for the rest of the world.
Taylor is in my hometown of Winnipeg. Taylor, your 5 minutes with Mr. O'Toole start now.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to spend time with you. Listen, Canadians are increasingly intolerant towards two-spirit, transgender, and non-binary individuals, and Canada is not doing enough to give us the quality of living that we have the right to. All marginalized Canadians have a right to dignity, to respect, to safety, but we're surrounded by abuse that's rooted in fear and archaic beliefs. It's fueled by misinformation. It's supported by systemic oppression and structural violence. As a transgender woman, my lived experience includes being stalked, harassed, defamed regularly by a network of bigots. I've received death threats. In what universe is this acceptable? So as a leader, what do you plan to do to end bigotry and transphobia and ensure for all marginalized Canadians the dignity, respect, and safety that is long overdue?
I agree, Taylor. I think dignity, respect, and safety is long overdue. And I want you to know, as leader of the Conservative Party, I've tried to make sure that that's been part of my leadership and part of my record as an MP. In fact, I was elected in a by-election. Rosie might remember this. I was a backbencher. And really, one of my first votes in my first 4 or 5 months was on extending human rights protections to gender identity and the trans community. And I was the first Conservative to stand and vote in favor of an NDP bill on that issue, because I said I'm in politics to stand up for all rights, for all Canadians. And that's how I've conducted myself in my political life. And I went from being that backbench person that nobody heard of. People still don't know me that well compared to our current Prime Minister. That's how I will be as Prime Minister. So that's been my approach, is my own track record. And I'm very proud to say I was chosen to lead our party as someone with a clear record, being pro-choice and being an ally to the LGBTQ community. And I want to make sure all Canadians know as Prime Minister, I'll fight for their interests.
I appreciate hearing a lot of those words, and I hear about you and the leadership of your party, which is fantastic. What about also the keeping your party in sync as well with those beliefs? Because we are pretty sure that not everybody bangs the same drum. Listen, I don't know if you understand my lived experience, but I can tell you point blank that bigotry and transphobia are directly related to my life expectancy. Like, what the other values of mine really matter when there's a non-zero and escalating probability of being a victim of a violent and possibly fatal assault. So aside from your personal beliefs, with your party, how would you ensure that everybody agrees that we all have a right and we all are valid?
Well, Taylor, let me say, you are valid, and I will fight and stand up for you and your rights. And all I can do as leader is set that example and tone. What I try and do is engage in dialogue respectfully and to try and bring people to my point of view. And I've had success, as I've said. I was in the minority of that vote I talked about long ago as a Conservative MP supporting an NDP bill. But now I would say more and more of society is of the same view on these things. If you look at the first time marriage equality came to a vote in the House of Commons, it was a very, very split vote amongst all parties. I think now the country has come a long way. It still has a ways to go. And I think my leadership, I've tried to use this from my first speech a year ago at 1:30 in the morning when I won, Taylor. I talked about I wanted the Conservative Party to represent more Canadians regardless of what community, including the LGBTQ community. Yeah. And I'll want you to hold me to account for that. That's part of what leadership is all about. Mr. Trudeau often says something but doesn't follow through. I want you to know my type of leadership is following through on commitments I make.
So let me, Taylor, ask whether there's actually evidence of that. I'm sure you know what I'm going to ask about the conversion therapy ban. This was a piece of legislation that would make it illegal for people to be forced into conversion therapy, to deny them or try to erase who they are. A majority of the Conservatives, 62 MPs, voted against that. You voted for it. You believe that the ban should go in place. If you are such a good leader, if you really can lead by example, convince people in your caucus this is the right way forward, is this not evidence that you can't do it?
Actually, it's not, Rosie, because when the bill first came, I spoke on it personally. It was introduced by a minister. I spoke as leader of the party. And our caucus was united on the fact that we wanted that type of harmful practice banned. And we actually offered to work with the government using their own description of the bill to make progress and to pass it quickly.
So what happened?
This was used, sadly, as a political wedge by Justin Trudeau, which is why the bill didn't pass. Let's remember, Rosie, this bill was dropped when Mr. Trudeau shut down Parliament to cover up the WE scandal. And in my first few months as leader, it was brought back, and I tried to say, let's ban this harmful practice. I spoke personally on it,
Yeah,
and we were willing to work with the government on it.
That's fine, and I don't disagree that it's being used as a wedge. I don't disagree with that. But the reality is that the majority of your caucus did not vote for that ban. You did, because you feel that principally that makes sense. If people like Taylor are to believe that your party is moving in a different direction, or that you can lead them in a different direction, where is the evidence of that when we look at that particular piece of legislation?
The evidence is when we tried to work with the government. As I said, in the first time it came to a vote in the House, I think there was only a handful of people that didn't vote in favor of banning the practice.
So the only reason they voted against it was because it was a wedge issue?
Well,
I mean,
this is a good question to ask Mr. Trudeau, because...
Well, I'm asking you. I've got him another day. I've got him another day.
Please ask him, because I don't think a community like the LGBTQ community, which Taylor has said has already been subject to violence and intimidation and threats, should be used as a political debate wedge in Ottawa.
Well, it wasn't just a wedge. It was an actual issue.
We could have passed that bill before Christmas, Rosie.
Systemic racism. It does not appear on your party's platform. You've been asked about it on the campaign trail. That seems strange to me. We have issues of systemic racism in this country. Do you believe we have issues of systemic racism that we need to deal with? And if you do, why wouldn't you put it in your platform?
We have found systemic racism in our justice system, particularly with criminal sentencing. And about 8 to 9 months ago, our party worked on a Justice Committee study in public safety on that issue. There should never be a discriminatory or a racist practice that sees higher incarceration rates for people of color or Indigenous Canadians, and we worked on that finding. And that's how we will conduct ourselves. I have said, whether it's the LGBTQ community, I want more Canadians from different faith backgrounds, different races, color, creeds running for our party. They are in this election, and we will tackle inequalities, Islamophobia, racism, anti-Semitism. We will play a leadership role, as we should.
Welcome back. Conservative leader Erin O'Toole is here taking questions from undecided voters. Next up, watch this.
Hi everyone, my name is Arslan Gaimi. I'm 22 years old and I'm a debate and public speaking instructor at an academy called FDT in beautiful Vancouver, British Columbia. I'm an alumnus of UBC where I studied political science. I'm an avid fan of Canadian politics, an often disappointed fan of the Canucks, and most importantly, I am an undecided voter. There are a couple of issues that are important to me. As a young person living in Vancouver, housing prices are always front of mind. I'm looking for a party with real solutions rather than gimmicks. As a racialized Canadian, as an immigrant, I have benefited greatly from the generosity of Canadians. So I'm looking for party leaders that will keep Canada open to the world.
Arslan, that's great. I want to make sure that people know that there's a whole Zoom audience there too, and apparently they're being very vocal and reacting, waving, and so we just want to make sure that people know that there's other people watching with us as well, and we appreciate you being here too. Okay, Arslan, your time with Mr. O'Toole, your 5 minutes starts now.
Hi, Mr. O'Toole. It's a real pleasure to meet you, even if it's virtual. So as I said in the video, I'm a young person in my early 20s living in Vancouver. It's one of the most expensive cities in this country, one of the most expensive cities in the world. So for me and for almost all of my friends, the number one question on our mind is, will we ever be able to afford a home in the city and increasingly in this country? So my question is simple. What would a conservative government do to make housing more affordable and to allow my generation to be able to build and grow our wealth as our parents and our grandparents were able to do?
Well, thank you, Arslan. This is one of the most important issues facing our country, because I don't want your generation to have to give up on that expectation that you work hard, you finish UBC, a great school, and you'll never be able to afford a place to live in your own community. So what did I do as leader? I put one of our MPs, who's a millennial from the Fraser Valley, Brad Viss, and I said I wanted the best plan we've ever put out on housing, an area we haven't always put forward really strong ideas. And we launched it, and it's going to play our role, because as you know, there's a municipal, provincial, and federal role. We're going to ban for 2 years foreign buying by non-residents. As you know, in Vancouver, the Tri-Cities, it has been driving the whole Lower Mainland crazy, locking up money for someone that's not going to help build our communities. We're going to ban that for 2 years to try and take some pressure off. We're going to free up federal lands, 15%. We're going to tie transit and infrastructure type investments to density outcomes and hold our municipal and provincial friends to push out more density. We're going to let first-time home buyers have longer mortgage terms. So you can lock in not just for a 4 or 5 year interest rate term. We want you to be able to get out to 8, 9, 10 years so that you can plan and make sure first-time buyer programs fit all markets. They don't exclude Vancouver, Lower Mainland, or the GTA where we're sitting right now. And we've got a number of other measures to try and get money into building more rental housing, because we don't see enough purpose-built rental housing because people want to get into the flipping game, which we've seen in some of these markets. The big difference between Mr. Trudeau and myself, I want outcomes. I want a plan that actually delivers on what we're saying we're going to do, because your generation deserves a different approach, because times have changed, especially in large parts of our country. And that's why tackling the mortgage rules and acts and terms, this is something that hasn't been looked at in decades. We're going to do it to fight for you.
Yeah, I wanted to, if I could, just transition to a different question that a lot of my friends have asked me to ask, which is, I am from Iran. I have plenty of friends from the country of Afghanistan, and I've personally been sort of unbelievably distraught and, relatively disappointed in the government of Canada's response to our obligations in that country.
We've been advocating for months, if not years. To his credit, when John McCallum was immigration minister, he worked with me and some veterans to get James Akam, a translator who was at risk at that time, to Canada. There's been no leadership for many years by Mr. Trudeau, and to think there were 1,200 Canadians in Afghanistan needing to be brought home, hundreds of contractors and interpreters, and he called an election. I will never, ever have an approach of putting my political interests ahead of the well-being of others, and I know many, many friends in the military that served in Afghanistan, and they're distraught that some of the people that supported them are at risk from the Taliban. We've got to stand by people who stood by us.
Arslan, I'm going to ask about the housing too, if you don't mind. Housing starts are a little bit higher than they have been this year. They're more like $270,000 a year. So we might expect over your plan to see 700 to 750, say, right? So your plan is to commit to build 1 million over 3 years. That's not actually a big jump from what the market is already producing. So I guess my question would be, is that enough to deal with the supply issue? And would that deal with some of what Arslan's talking about there?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. Our plan would get that up to what we feel is about 350,000 a year.
Right.
That's our commitment, because I deliver on what I pledge.
Well, we'll see.
Unlike Mr.
We'll see.
Trudeau. No, we have costed this and looked at how we can partner to get money out to municipalities.
But how? So you're not going to be building the houses. So how do you get up to that?
Well, if you look at
how do you push private companies to suddenly create that many houses?
Oh, well, a lot of the provinces are already looking at tying transit investments to density requirements. We're going to make that an expectation. Ontario is doing that, for example, to help accelerate. And we're often a funding partner, Rosie. As you know, we're often a 1/3 funder, and we don't run the zoning and rules. So we're saying to our municipal provincial partners, we've got a supply and demand problem here. If you want to accelerate federal investment in projects, make sure density, getting things built is part of it. Did you have something else, Arslan?
It's rare they have a moment with a federal leader this way. The comment I just wanted to make is many parties often have relatively short-term demand-side solutions that put more money in people's pockets but don't solve the underlying supply problem, right? So it drives up the prices. So I think the commitment I would love is that it is difficult and hard to build more supply. It might even be expensive, and the federal government might have to intervene more than you'd be comfortable with to expand supply dramatically over the next 15, 20 years. Are you willing to sort of commit to those, deeply rooted long-term solutions that really solve the supply problems, rather than a short-term solution that, throws a few bucks at people but doesn't solve the underlying cause?
Absolutely. In fact, that's why for the first time in generations, we will revisit mortgages and how they're even structured. It's why we're willing to give up 15% of Crown land and building holdings to try and do our part to actually give a little bit more supply directly. And why I put a millennial MP from British Columbia on this file. I want to change the dialogue here, because your generation is going to be held back because it's not the 1970s or 80s anymore. We have to reflect the reality your generation is facing. And the federal government is a key player, but not the only one. So this is another reason why we need less Mr. Trudeau dictating to everyone. We need more partnerships here.
Welcome back to Face to Face. We invited undecided voters to have one-on-one time with the federal leaders. Erin O'Toole joins us tonight. Now let's meet the next questioner.
Hi, I'm Grace. I'm 26 years old and I live in Edmonton, Alberta. I first came to Canada when I was 4 years old with my parents. I grew up in BC, but I've lived in Alberta for a very long time, and I'm the oldest sibling of 3. For this election, I feel very undecided. There's so many issues facing Canadians in our country, from the pandemic, cost of living, climate change, and more. And so I'll be basing my vote around the kind of government that we will elect, because that will be hugely important to the steps we do or don't take in confronting our biggest challenges. My question to the leader of the Conservatives is around the party that he leads and what kind of government him and that party will form if they are to win. Hi, thank you so much for speaking with me. So looking through your platform, there's definitely some things that I was interested in and pleased to see. For me, it's the most moderate Conservative platform I've seen your party present in all of the elections I voted in so far. I think that's a good thing and it reflects your views on certain issues. But my question is, given that your party and some of its members have, in some cases in the past, taken some very different positions, how will you, if you form government, handle party or even caucus members who may feel your views aren't conservative enough?
Well, great question, Grace. I said when I won the leadership, I wanted to grow the Conservative Party and movement. I wanted more people to see themselves reflected. I said I want more people staring in the mirror on election day and seeing a Conservative staring back, and we'll see on September 20th if that's going to be a reality. But everyone running in this election is committed 100% to Canada's recovery plan. Because as I said earlier, we're focusing a plan to deal with the health and economic challenges we face post-COVID. In your province as well, you know, there's national unity challenges where people have been so frustrated after 6 years of Mr. Trudeau. There's people that want to give up on Canada now. So I want to rebuild sort of a partnership federalism to tackle the big issues, especially economic. But I also think, and I've been very honest as a leader, there's some areas in the last couple of elections we haven't met the expectations of Canadians. Climate change being one, reconciliation perhaps being another. So on the first full day of this campaign, Grace, we put out Canada's recovery plan. I said, I may not be that well known. I'm a kid from the suburbs, not far from here in Toronto. I'm putting out a pledge of what I think we need to do as a country to get our country back on its feet, to help people. And that is what you will hold me and our entire team to.
Yeah, well, thank you for that answer. The reason I ask is because, for instance, you mentioned already climate change. That's a big issue for both of us. It is for many voters. It's tied to so many other issues like affordability, cost of living, the future. This is the plan that you put forward this year for climate change is the first time that the Conservatives have a plan that includes carbon pricing. That's something that the party has, to my understanding, not been for at all before. I did read that a couple months ago back at the policy convention that a majority of the delegates did vote to reject adding statements like climate change is real to the policy book. So just using that as an example of perhaps a more delicate issue within the party, how will you kind of deal with that as Prime Minister once it's no longer a matter of campaigning, but the Conservatives are actually to become the governing party?
So what I've tried to do, particularly for the thousands of families in Northern Alberta, in Edmonton, and you would see it firsthand, Grace, there's economic challenges. How can we make sure we have a world-class resource sector that is getting emissions down, that we get our emissions down to meet our Paris targets without the economic destruction and dislocation we're seeing right now with the Trudeau plan? So what we did is we went and found the best climate change consultants in the country and worked with them and a range of stakeholders to try and come up with a plan to price carbon, get emissions down, but minimize the economic impact. We have a lot of things in the plan beyond the carbon price and the low carbon savings account, electric vehicles, hydrogen, small modular reactors. But this is an area where we have to win some trust. But as I tell you, I want to make sure Albertans have an economic recovery as well. So we've been very deliberate with our plan. We need to meet our targets, but also have a strong economy, or we can't fight climate change if we don't have a strong economy.
So I'm going to ask a question here too, Grace, if you don't mind. We've heard you say that Justin Trudeau's emissions targets are meaningless because he doesn't hit them.
I've never said meaningless. I said he will say what he needs to, and then doesn't achieve them.
Fine. Where you are going to hit yours, this is what you say. So let's say you do hit them. You do hit the previous targets because they're no longer the ones that we have in the world. I guess that sort of leaves the question, where is your ambition? Why not have targets that you seek to meet instead of ones that we know that we will meet? Because most people believe that we are now going to meet the emissions, the 30%, right, by 2036.
Well, you judge future behavior by past behavior. 6 years of Mr. Trudeau, he's never made a target. He's now saying he's going to hit a home run, Rosie. He's not even in the ballpark or dressed to bat yet. What I've said is we will achieve our Paris commitments. And look, as you know, I've gotten some turbulence for putting my plan out early. I did that to show people we're going to take it seriously. And but
it's not as seriously as the rest of the world. It is the very least you could have promised.
It is the Paris commitment. And what I think makes people cynical about politicians, and I don't want to be one of those, is saying whatever people want to hear. It will be tough to meet our Paris commitments, but we have a plan to do that.
Those are the previous Paris
Then you can show
We
ambition.
now have new ones, right?
Mr. Trudeau changed his targets
The
twice.
world changed their targets. The world
Mr.
changed
Trudeau
their targets.
changed Canada's targets.
You have to update
twice
the targets after 2 years.
in the
You have
10
to do that.
days after we released our plan. None of our allies have met their targets in the long term either. So what we have to do is make sure we deliver.
You say often that Justin Trudeau says one thing and does another. As Grace has pointed out, the same thing could be said of you. Whether it be the promise on a carbon tax, whether it be some of your comments around guns, and whether it be other things. Sometimes I don't even know where you stand on an issue, to be frank. And it sounds like Grace is in the same place as me. In a survey of Conservative leadership candidates by the National Firearms, you said you would conduct a line-by-line review of the Firearms Act and that you supported repealing several gun laws. You then said that you were going to repeal the order in council by the Liberals for 1,500 weapons that they put on a list. You now say, no, all firearms that are currently banned will remain banned and we're going to review it. How does that work? Like, where are you on that? You've got one thing. You had to put a footnote in your platform in order to make sure that people would believe you. You do understand that you have a credibility issue on this.
I want people to know that we're going to keep the restrictions in place now, in place. Public safety is important for me.
You can't keep the restrictions in place and repeal the ban. Those two things don't work together, Mr. O'Toole.
Right, we're keeping the restrictions in place, including the order in council, Rosie, and I provided that clear commitment to Canadians. I've also said consistently that I do want to try and take the politics out of what is the classification system, because what happens is after a terrible event like the tragic event in Nova Scotia, Mr. Trudeau almost tries to demonize law-abiding citizens like hunters and farmers for something that in that case took place by someone who is a known public safety risk using illegally smuggled firearms from the United States. So let's go after what is really leading to the rise in shootings in cities, which is the illegal smuggling. We live above a country with a lot of firearms, and we have to really work hard to keep them out of Canada because we have a much different system.
But how is restricting the Beretta Storm weapon used at the Dawson College shooting, for instance, how is that political? What is the political decision that goes into restricting that firearm? On what planet does that firearm need to be part of what is allowed in this country?
We need to have gun control and keep firearms out of the hands of criminals. Even in the Dawson situation, I believe it was an illegally obtained firearm. So what we have to do is stop that from happening and to make sure that people that follow the rules, that are screened, that do the training, that are licensed, that are responsible, whose names every day are run through our CIPIC police system, aren't shown as the problem when Mr. Trudeau actually knows what the problem is. It's the border. 90% almost of firearms used in offenses are illegally obtained from the United States.
But surely restrictions on having the guns here would help as well.
I think we have. That's why we've said we're keeping the restrictions in place.
For
and
how
we're
long?
going to try and take the politics.
How long will that take, that review?
We're going to let the review run. It will be independent because this is something that politicians should not be interfering with.
It's never going to be independent. The people on the review board are going to be people named by you.
No, I've said it will be public, and there'll be representation from all parties and all groups.
Two more questions, if I can, on mandatory vaccines. Why not require people to be vaccinated to get on a plane or a train? You're vaccinated, I'm vaccinated. Why should I have to go on a plane and worry if the person next to me is or isn't? Why is that person who won't get it done, and you want people to get vaccinated, you've said it, why is it their right to come on a plane or a train and it's not mine?
Well, I want to get to herd immunity. I want to get to the 90% level. We recently announced a way that we think we can do that. And as you know, my wife and I had COVID. We videoed our vaccination.
Everyone videoed
I'm
very
public.
That's not what I'm asking you. I'm asking you, what is the big deal with telling people that they can't do everything they want if they're not vaccinated?
Because we have to respect people making the decision for themselves. We have to educate, we have to inform, and even the way you're describing it, Rosie, is almost them versus us. And in a pandemic,
it's not them versus us, but
we have to work together.
It's about safety. It's about safety,
Absolutely.
public safety.
Absolutely.
So why should the person who's not making the choice for the collective safety be allowed to impose their choice on the people that did?
And if that
it's
person,
not an us versus
if
them.
that person comes from a background that has historical discrimination within our health system, we've seen that there's higher levels of hesitancy in people of color, in Indigenous Canadians, and the way we tackle that, Rosie, is not by fighting, it's by uniting. And so I want to respect people's decision here,
Yes.
but also use rapid testing and screening, masking, everything to keep safe. And why are we in an election, in a pandemic? We should be working together. That will always be my approach as leader.
Okay, my last question is about healthcare. You mentioned it earlier. You say you support universal healthcare. I believe you. But as Prime Minister, your job is to ensure universality. Your job is to enforce the Canada Public Health Act. You also say that provinces can make decisions in their jurisdiction and find innovations. That doesn't sound like someone that's going to go around and enforce the Canada Health Act. So if you are Prime Minister, can someone pay to get access to a service faster than the rest of us who have to be on the wait list?
So, Rosie, when Mr. Trudeau and the Liberals were caught manipulating video and flagged by Twitter,
I asked you a very specific question.
Did they cut, what did they cut out of my statement? I said public access is paramount.
I don't want to talk about the video. I'm asking you this
Paramount.
right now. I understand that that's your position. I am asking you, if provinces want to allow for people to pay for services and not wait in line, will you allow that to happen as Prime Minister? People deserve an answer. That's a super important question.
If the provinces can innovate to either get wait times down, provide more choice, I'm not sure where everyone here got vaccinated, but the fact that the provinces used the pharmacies to deploy vaccines, that's the private sector to innovate.
But the provinces paid for that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Public access was paramount. So this is about not having Ottawa control things. I'll tell you, Ottawa has failed Indigenous healthcare, and that's a direct federal responsibility. So when a province can do that, offer more choice, less wait times, and fix gaps in their system like they did using the pharmacies for vaccines, why would Ottawa stand in the way of that?
But is that publicly funded?
Yes. And what I'm doing, what's interesting about
I won't be allowed to go and pay for something in order to get ahead of someone else waiting on a list.
What's interesting about their attack is it came after I pledged the largest investment in our public system in a generation.
That is back-end loaded.
It's 6% in year, so it will go up over time, but it's much larger than Mr. Trudeau's, and I am not tying conditions to it because you know what? I believe the premiers, whether it's the NDP premier in Mr. Horgan in BC or Mr. Houston in Nova Scotia, I believe they're going to make decisions for the best interests of their citizens, and they need a partner in Ottawa, not a parent.
But just again, you will not police provinces if they create private access for people to pay for services. Yes or no?
I've said a couple of things. One is access to abortion services for women across the country is a right, and that needs to be maintained. And to make sure that the public and universal core of our system is maintained. And with a $60 billion commitment over 10 years, we're going to make sure that this system is not only secure, it is there for the future.
Last question. You talk a lot about creating division. I don't think anyone really starts out hoping to create division. When you were running to be leader, though, you talked a lot about taking back Canada. That was just in August of 2020. I didn't understand what you meant then. I'm not sure I understand now. But that, to me, that kind of language doesn't seem to be a uniting kind of language. Do you feel like at times during the leadership run that you too contributed to creating division?
I often talk about the first public Q&A I took when I ran for leader. It was in Nisku, Alberta, and a veteran stood up, served the country for 30 years and wants to leave Canada because of what he sees Mr. Trudeau doing to Alberta. I wanted to say we need to get back to Canada working again, working together, and secure the future. After the last 18 months our country's faced, we've offered a transparent, detailed roadmap, Canada's recovery plan, to securing the future for all Canadians, including the great 4 voters that we spoke with tonight, that I hope at least found that I tried to address their concerns. And even if we don't agree on all issues, my plan is there and I will be accountable to you. And I think Canada's best days are ahead, but we need leadership and we need a plan.
Thanks, everybody, for doing that. And of course, thank you to the Conservative leader, Erin O'Toole, who has just one more week. You're probably going to make it.
Not that I'm counting the days.
Tomorrow, we will have Liberal leader Justin Trudeau here to answer some of your questions and mine too. I'm Rosemary Barton. Thanks again, and I'll see you back here tomorrow night.
Thank you.